Welcome to Thinking Deeper by 6-7.
It's great to be here.
Today we are walking right into the center of a storm. We're looking at a figure who is, you could argue, the architect of the Western moral universe.
Absolutely. We're talking about Moses.
For billions of people, Jews, Christians, and Muslims, he isn't just a character in a book. This is the man who climbed the mountain, who spoke to the Creator face to face, and brought down the law.
He is the anchor point. Without Moses, you really don't have the Exodus. Without the Exodus, there's no covenant. And without the covenant, the whole concept of monotheism, well, it starts to wobble.
And that is exactly where the tension is. Because when you step out of the synagogue or the church and into the history department, the story gets complicated. We're looking at this through a secular lens, using the work of scholars like Dr. Bart Ehrman.
And that forces us to ask the really big, uncomfortable question. What if Moses is a ghost?
What if the man who supposedly wrote the law never actually lived?
It's the ultimate collision. It's faith versus fact. If history suggests the Exodus didn't happen as it's written, or that Moses is maybe a composite character stitched together by later writers, does that just crumble the foundation?
Or does it reveal a totally different kind of truth? A truth about how we, as humans, create gods and nations and foundational stories for ourselves.
It's a detective story, really.
It is. We're trying to find fingerprints on a crime scene that's 3,000 years old. We're going to dig into all of it, the contradictions, the Egyptian connection, the myths. But before we start turning over these ancient stones, I do have a small request.
Go for it.
If you like my channel, please subscribe and press the like button. It really, really helps us keep these deep dives going.
So where do we start? The biggest question of all.
Let's do it. Did Moses exist? You'd think, for a guy this famous, the answer would be a slam dunk yes. But when Dr. Ehrman tackles this, he doesn't say yes.
No, but he doesn't say no either. He says, I don't know. And that I don't know is actually more unsettling for a lot of people than a hard no.
Why is that?
Because it tells you the evidence is just so thin. It's so problematic that a world-class historian can't make a definitive call. Ehrman points out that if you look at the time when Moses was supposed to have lived, the late Bronze Age, we have, well, massive problems with the story in Exodus.
Right, the logistics alone are just mind-boggling. The Bible says something like 2 million people left Egypt.
2 million.
That's the population of Houston, Texas, walking through a desert.
Exactly. And a group that large leaves a footprint. They leave broken pottery, they leave campsites, they bury their dead. But the Sinai Desert during that period is archaeologically silent. We have no Egyptian records of this huge slave revolt, none of the economic collapse you'd expect if your entire labor force just up and left.
So the outside evidence is missing. But, and this is where it gets so fascinating, Ehrman points to a clue that's hiding in plain sight. It's right there in the Bible. It's in the name, Moses.
This is one of my favorite parts of the whole puzzle.
Because most people assume Moses is a Hebrew name. It sounds like it fits with, Abraham or Isaiah. But it's not Hebrew at all, is it?
No, it's Egyptian. And not just any Egyptian name. It's connected to royalty. We see it in the names of the great pharaohs, Thutmose, Rameses.
Right.
That root, Mos or Moses, just means born of or child of.
So Thutmose is child of the god Thoth. Ramesses is child of the god Ra.
Exactly. So Moses is just child. The divine part of the name is missing. It's like someone's name is just son with no family name attached. It's a fragment.
And this one little clue just splits the whole debate in two, doesn't it? It really shows the difference between a faith-based reading and a historical one.
It absolutely does.
Yeah.
Let's take the believer's argument first. If you are an ancient Hebrew storyteller inventing a national hero to liberate your people from Egypt, why would you give him an Egyptian name?
You wouldn't. It's like the Americans in 1776 naming their hero King George Washington. It's just awkward.
Precisely. Historians call this the criterion of embarrassment. The idea is you wouldn't invent a detail that's inconvenient or contradictory unless it was a historical fact you were just stuck with. So the argument is there must have been a real guy with this name.
That makes perfect sense. But then the skeptic, Dr. Ehrman, comes in with this concept of verisimilitude, and this really changes how you see it.
It's a crucial tool for reading ancient texts. Verisimilitude just means the appearance of truth.
Like historical fiction.
Exactly. If you're a smart, educated scribe living hundreds of years later and you're writing a story set in Egypt, what do you do to make it feel real?
You add local color.
You give your main character an authentic-sounding Egyptian name. It's a literary device to create a sense of reality. It's like writing a novel set in Paris and naming your character Pierre, not Bob. It doesn't mean Pierre existed. It just means you did your homework.
So the name could either be the best evidence for historical Moses or the best evidence for a very clever storyteller.
And we just can't be sure which it is.
This idea of a clever writer is a perfect way to get to the next problem. Because for centuries, the tradition was that Moses wasn't just the main character. He was the author.
The author of the first 5 books of the Bible, yeah. The Pentateuch.
But the historical consensus today is absolutely not.
Oh, that theory's been dead in the water for a long, long time.
Yeah.
I mean, even medieval scholars were pointing out problems. The most obvious one is at the end of Deuteronomy, where the text describes Moses' own death and burial.
Right. And then I died and God buried me and no one knows where my grave is. It's a little hard to write your own obituary in the past tense.
Very. But it's much deeper than just that. Today, what scholars work with is the documentary hypothesis, or GEDP.
JEDP. It sounds so technical.
It does, but the idea is actually pretty simple. The Pentateuch is a collage. It wasn't written by one person. It was written by at least 4 different authors or sources. We call them JEDP.
And they were all writing at different times.
Centuries apart, with different political views, different styles. They even called God by different names. And then much, much later, an editor, a redactor, stitched their separate scrolls together into one continuous story.
And the proof is in the seams, in
Yeah.
the contradictions.
Exactly.
Herman brings up one that I just find hilarious. The plague paradox.
Ah, the livestock problem.
Yes. So we're in the middle of the 10 plagues. It's getting bad in Egypt.
Right. So in one plague, a pestilence or disease,
Mm-hmm.
the text in Exodus is very clear. It says that all the livestock of the Egyptians died. Every single horse, donkey, and cow. A total wipeout.
100% gone. The fields are empty.
But then, just a few verses later, we get the plague of hail, and God warns the Egyptians, hey, bring your livestock in from the field so the hail doesn't kill them.
Wait, what? Livestock?
Exactly. And sure enough, the hail comes down and kills all the livestock that were left in the
Are
fields.
these zombie cows? Where'd they come from?
It's a logical impossibility if you assume a single author. But if you see it through the JEDP lens, it makes perfect sense.
Okay, explain.
Source J had a tradition about a plague of disease that killed all the animals. Source D had a different tradition about a plague of hail. The editor, centuries later, had both of these sacred stories. He couldn't just throw one out.
So he put them both in?
He put them both in, side by side, even though they contradict each other. The contradiction isn't a mistake. It's a scar from the editing process. It's the proof that this is a human anthology, not a divine monologue.
And speaking of constructing stories, we have to talk about the baby in the basket.
The quintessential Moses story.
It's so iconic. The baby in the reeds, floating down the Nile, saved by Pharaoh's daughter. It just screams, this child is special.
It does. It also screams borrowed.
Because this wasn't the first time the story was told.
Not even close. Ehrman points to the legend of Sargon of Akkad. Sargon was a Mesopotamian king who lived more than 1,000 years before the Moses story was even written.
And his origin story is?
It's beat for beat the same. Sargon's mother can't reveal her pregnancy. She gives birth in secret, puts the baby in a reed basket, seals it with tar so it floats, and sets it adrift on the river. A water drawer, basically a gardener, finds him, adopts him, and raises him to be the great king.
That's not just a parallel. That's the same script.
It's remarkably close.
Sure.
And this trope is all over the ancient world. Romulus and Remus in Rome, Cyrus the Great in Persia, this infant hero saved from death is a standard model.
So did the biblical authors just copy the Sargon story? Did they have a copy of it?
Ehrman thinks it's probably not direct copying. It's more about using a common genre. In the ancient world, if you wanted to signal that your main character was a big deal, divinely chosen leader,
You gave him a miraculous birth story.
you gave him a miraculous birth story. It's like a superhero origin today. If a movie starts with a doomed planet and a baby in a rocket, we know we're watching Superman. The basket story isn't meant to be a historical fact. It's a literary signal to the ancient audience. Pay attention. This Moses guy is on the same level as the great kings.
But there's a danger in seeing these parallels everywhere, right? I think Ehrman calls it parallelomania.
Yes, exactly. You have to be careful.
He brings up this one theory that connects the golden calf story to Homer's Odyssey. And when I first heard it, I thought, wow.
It's a tempting one. So in the Odyssey, Odysseus' men are starving. They kill and eat the sacred cattle of the sun god, Helios. And as a result, they're all killed by the gods.
And in Exodus, the Israelites build a golden calf to worship while Moses is on the mountain and God punishes them. So you have cows, divine anger, punishment, Looks like a match.
It looks like one on the surface.
Yeah.
But Ehrman says, hold on, look at the details. Odysseus's men ate the cattle out of desperation. The Israelites worshipped an image of a calf as a god.
That's a huge difference. One is about survival, the other is about idolatry.
Completely different motives. And the punishments are different. The Greeks die immediately. The Israelites are condemned to wander for 40 years. The point is, just because two ancient stories involve cows and angry gods doesn't mean one copy the other. You have to be rigorous.
But even if we throw out the weak parallels, we're still left with what might be the biggest problem of all for the historical Moses.
The timeline.
The timeline, the gap of silence. So let's just run the numbers. If the Exodus happened, when would it have been?
Most scholars who try to date it would place it somewhere in the 13th century BCE. Let's say around 1250 BCE for argument's sake.
Okay, 1250 BCE is the event. When were the first written accounts of it created?
The earliest sources, the ones we call J and E, are usually dated to around 950 to 850 BCE.
So that's a gap of 300 or 400 years.
At a minimum. And a lot of scholars now think these stories were written down even later, maybe during the Babylonian exile in the 6th century BCE. That would make it a 600 or 700-year gap.
600 years. Just of people telling stories around the campfire. No written records, just oral tradition passed down for 20 generations.
Think about that. Can you tell me exactly what your ancestors were doing in the year 1400? Do you know their names? Can you quote their speeches?
Of course not. It's impossible.
And stories change when they're told. They aren't preserved like fossils. They evolve. They adapt to the needs of the people telling them in the present.
I love Ehrman's analogy here. He says we should treat the Bible like we treat cable news.
It's a great analogy. If you watch two different news channels cover the same event, you get two totally different realities, right? You know each one has an agenda, a narrative they're pushing. You don't just blindly trust one of them.
So the biblical authors weren't neutral reporters.
Not at all. They were theological propagandists. They were trying to answer the question, who are we as a people? They were building a national identity, not writing a police report of what happened in the desert.
So when we put it all together, we have a name that's probably a literary device. We have a text that's a patchwork of contradictions. We have a birth story borrowed from ancient myths. And a 600-year game of telephone. After all of that, is there anything left of the man himself?
From a purely historical scientific perspective, the man Moses just fades into the mist. We can't prove he was real. We certainly can't prove the miracles happened.
It really is like hunting for a ghost.
It is, but, and this is the most important part, I think, we can see the fingerprints of the people who created the ghost. We can see the ancient Israelites, a small, struggling people, creating a story to explain their place in the world.
They didn't have a massive empire, so they wrote themselves a massive story.
Exactly. The Pentateuch isn't a history book. It's a national manifesto. It's the story that says, we are God's chosen people, and this is why.
So whether a man named Moses actually stood on a mountain becomes, in a way, less important than the power of the story that said he did.
In terms of religion and culture, absolutely. The story became the reality. The myth created the nation.
Which brings us to a really provocative final thought to leave everyone with.
Right.
If the foundation of the law, this idea of God's chosen people that still shapes our world today, is built on a narrative constructed centuries later, borrowing myths from its neighbors, what does that tell us about the nature of revealed religion?
It makes you ask a very hard question. Is a religion's truth based on the historical reality of its founder? Or is it based on the power and endurance of the story itself? Can a ghost, a literary creation, be just as powerful, maybe even more powerful, than a man of flesh and blood?
Because a man can die, but a story about liberation, a story about a covenant with God that seems to live forever.
That's the enigma.
And that is something I think we'll all be chewing on for a long time. Thank you for this. This was incredible.
My pleasure. It was a great conversation.
And to everyone listening, keep thinking deeper. We'll see you next time.